Hello. Welcome to the session. More folks are streaming in, which is really good. But I wanted to welcome you to this is Top Shops, field notes from folks in the field. Customers, I have the opportunity to work with a large number of customers in my role, and I'm not sure how to put it nicely, but many times the customers' environments are not as good as I would like them to be, and the processes are not as good as we would recommend. So therefore, when you end up running into a customer or environment where they're firing on all cylinders and they're doing things right, it draws attention. And you look at it and you say, why is it that these guys are doing this and these guys are not? And so I've spent a number of years trying to figure out exactly what that recipe is and what those conditions are that allow those customers to actually do things in what we would consider the right way. So this session is going to cover that. First, I'll talk a little bit about myself. I'm a solutions architect within MCS. I kind of cut my teeth in the field. I was a field consultant, did a lot of delivery, a lot of installations, and a lot of custom work. Worked with my IT forum for an extended period of time, and I attribute a lot of my success and a lot of my capabilities today on the community. A lot of what I do is because of the community, acknowledging, recognizing the work that I've done and helping to share that with other people. So I really appreciate that. I had the opportunity to start a company and some of those community contributions, mostly around Config Manager. But today, I no longer am permitted to kind of refer to myself as a Config Manager specialist, primarily because when you're dealing with a particular product, that's going contrary to a lot of what I'm talking about today. I've learned myself over the years that you actually have to change the way that you focus on your job and on your career. And the one big question that I ran into was, what if Config Manager went away? I never thought about that before because, oh, come on. I mean, how else are you going to do this or how else are you going to do that? And only in the past couple of months and years has it really kind of clicked that, wait a second, there are things that are possible that I hadn't even factored in way back in the day. And therefore, the perspective that you need to have is a little bit different these days. Again, the session is talking about customers or environments and conditions that allowed certain environments and IT shops to excel, and what I saw as their ability to kind of take it to the next level. One of the biggest values that I see at MMS is when you can take something and immediately go home and apply either the lessons that you learned, the tools that you got, or some other piece of information. Now, a lot of that you might have already gotten. Today's Thursday. It's almost done, but I'm hoping that if you haven't found anything yet, I'm hoping something that you can have a takeaway from here. I have the session divided into two parts. How many people is their first MMS? Holy moly. Okay. And then the number of people who've been to one of my sessions before. You came back. No, okay. So in this, there's a number of things that I've done in the past that are still relevant today, and I'm going into those near the end. I talk about it as automation tips, and we've gone through them before, and it was kind of, I like to look at it as they were talking about extreme automation, and these are things that I've been sharing with customers over the years. I put it near the end because those are the types of things that you might still be able to get value even if I don't make it to those slides. So they're in the deck. You can take a look at them. There's code in there as well as other pieces of information. But if you hadn't attended an MMS before, I wanted to make sure that was still available. The first part is really talking about the profile of top shops. I had to readjust my sessions. Now, I usually, I'm still tweaking and tuning during the MMS whenever I have the opportunity, just because I think of new ideas and things I want to put in. But this week, I got really smacked in the face, metaphorically, by when I was talking with folks. They were telling me that I was trying to talk about these ideas, these things I was going to get into in my session, and they were like, BS. Okay, whatever. it was like the Matrix, and it's funny, I'm an architect, so I'm the architect, and I found that the people could not grasp this utopian idea of people actually doing things wonderfully. And so I actually had to change, and instead of changing it and saying, no, they were miserable, it was really bad, you don't like that. But I actually have to, what I feel like is I need to prime the pump and get you to understand what these shops are doing that is actually allowing them to perceive things in a different way and invest their money and invest their effort into areas that are actually benefiting them going forward. And then all of a sudden they start realizing, oh, well, we can do this. Oh, that's not that hard. And they're wondering why other customers are struggling. And so that retooling that I did this week has a little bit more of an investment of helping you to understand or at least perceive what's going on in the coming couple years. And I find it really, really important for everyone to understand that in order to grasp the other things that these customers are already doing. And one of the items that this doesn't fit anywhere else in the session, but I wanted to put it in there because of what was mentioned by Brad during the keynote, was the fact that if you can't match internally the services that are being provided online in the cloud by one of these free services or what have you, if you're not actually able to deliver that in a cost-effective manner, then you really need to figure out what it is that you're doing. I mean, are you reinventing the wheel? Are you spending 10 times as much as you need to when you could actually subscribe to a service to do the same thing? Now, there are some people who feel like, no, I can do it in-house for cheaper and, and do it well. But there's a number of people who that's not really as possible, and therefore you got to figure out, should I be, should subscribing to something in the cloud actually be viable? I want to talk about the fact that IT is changing, and it's not. I'm not. I wanted to throw hyperbole up there just because I think it's a cool word. But this is not the fact of IT is changing, buzzword, whatever. If you think about the way that the world was before businesses had computers, they didn't have computers, and they were thinking, well, geez, what do I need computers for? And then right now you end up having these environments where I think about this, I got smacked in the face metaphorically again, where I was talking about a 4-year life cycle on a laptop, and I was talking to them about their OS deployment in that exact same time frame of, okay, 4 years and you're going to do this, that, and the other. And then I thought about it. Okay, so if you bought a laptop today, 4 years from now, my daughter will graduate college. Not only that, she'll actually get a job in the workforce. She could be a colleague of mine by the time that laptop goes out of service. I don't have the words to express that put things into perspective for me. For me, that was a long way out. But when I'm sitting there putting in perspective of, oh my God, my daughter's going to graduate college, that then told me I need to think a little bit more about what the world is going to be like. Because if somebody was asking me, what's the world going to be like when your daughter graduates college? It sure as heck wasn't what I was thinking about in my IT perspective. I was still looking at the same process, the same things going on. And if you think about it, that over the past 10, 15 years, businesses have gotten more computers and they've gotten faster. And that's the primary thing that's being done over the past 10 or 15 years. And I can guarantee you, I don't know what it's going to look like in the next 4 or 5 years, but I can guarantee you that it's not going to be just faster machines. And you all are aware of a lot of this stuff, but I just wanted to put that a little bit in perspective. The fact is, it's very difficult to know what things are transitioning to. And unlike, when we talk about user experiences, the computers it's graduated from, tubes to punch cards and keyboards, and then you got these mice and all these other things. And that was easy because you could see it. It was tangible. But in the IT environment, quite often you don't actually know that something is happening, that this transition, this shift is occurring until it actually occurs, or until it's already done and you're already behind. And so from what I wanted to make sure that you at least had a little bit of a perspective on that end. When we go back in the history and we look at this, the questions that ended up being asked were, do we really need computers? Okay, do we need more? I mean, I started the workplace, and they were still dealing with terminals. And you're talking about, okay, well, does that admin assistant actually need a computer? Well, that's not a question anymore. It's kind of, a rite of passage. You enter a business, and here's your computer, just like your login ID. And then, does everybody need? Okay, everybody needs a computer. Does everybody need? Yes, everybody needs email. And the fact is that there were businesses, and we know that they existed, who said we don't need computers. You got the was it the CIO of or CEO of IBM saying, there will never be a need for more than 10 computers in the world. Then you get to today, and similar questions. I mean, I can't even proclaim that I'm a fan of the cloud, because it's kind of like your team wins the Super Bowl, and then you're sitting there going, hey, I'm a fan. But it's hard to, if you weren't actually cheering for them when they were terrible, then, it's hard to say you're cheering for them then. But I have to say right now, the cloud itself, the moment that somebody actually demonstrated to me that there was value there beyond the fact that I could go subscribe to Hotmail or get my Xbox Live, those were things that I was using and doing. I didn't see a value in my IT environment. Well, then somebody ends up bringing up, well, okay, well, how about this? We'll end up automatically uploading any of this cold data up to the cloud, and it'll just sit up there, and it's accessible and everything, but it's just going to be up there in the cloud, and it's going to cost you 1/10 as much. And you get to just free up, 50 terabytes of storage locally. Oh, so I don't have to buy new disk. I just it shuffles it off. Magically, I get new disk space for, X number of dollars a month. Well, I actually see that as a tangible value. And a lot of times, a lot of the resistance that people have with cloud services is the fact that you're not necessarily seeing where that value is coming right now. You're not seeing where that value is actually going to apply directly to your business. And the fact is that you don't need, it's very important that you don't sit there and look and say, I don't know how the cloud applies to me, and therefore I'm not going to worry about it. The fact is that you have to say, the cloud is going to apply to me eventually. It is going to be used by somebody at some point in time, and I need to figure out, maybe in some way, how can I take advantage of that in my business? And again, down at the bottom of that was something that I thought about. There were so many things that I did not too long ago that I don't have to do today. And the fact is, there are things that I grew up on. There are things that made my career that if I were to think about them today, it's like, that didn't exist. That didn't happen. I mean, it was kind of nuts. Right now, I mean, I'm not even sure what I could come up with that would actually, distinguish me from other people. It really is tough, and you've got to be putting things into a different mindset. You're not thinking about, I'm going to be a config manager specialist. Anybody who's a config manager specialist, you need to broaden your thinking. Because what if config manager's not there? You need to be thinking about something broader than that. You need to be thinking about, what am I trying to do with config manager? I'm providing a service. My customer, my end user needs to do something. And I'm helping them to do that. And that may be with pieces of config manager, but more often than not, it's pieces of config manager and orchestrator and Intune and managed by ops manager. And the hard part is that you have to find a balance between being a specialist in something when it, so that you can fix it when it breaks, but you're also providing value beyond just knowing a product. And the big thing here is, what if every product was perfect, easy to use, easy to understand? What if you didn't have to install it, or it took 3 minutes to install, and all you had to do was say, do I really need that? And you go, okay, and you swipe the credit card, and it appears in your business, and you get to use it. I personally, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, geez, what would I do with my time? Well, I would be figuring out how to stay employed. I'd be figuring out, what am I going to do to provide value, to maximize that, to continue to drive value for my company. And that's one of the big things about top shops. The businesses that are doing this stuff, they are actually trying to get to the point where they are using IT to distinguish themselves from their competitors. They want to take these people who might have been specialists in products, and they want to get them to figure out, how do you make me better? How do you make me a better customer? And how do you make me a better competitor against these other vendors? Now, I'm not talking about the cloud in this. So if anybody's leaving, I'm not talking about the cloud in this. The cloud was just one of the examples I wanted to use about the fact that it is real, it exists, and it's not going to go away. Now, I applaud Google and Apple for going to extremes with things. PC's dead. You know what? Your laptop, it doesn't, you don't need to have an operating system. Everything will be done on the web because you're always connected. It doesn't work that way. I mean, come on. It's like talking to my 18-year-old daughter. You never let me do this. You always do that. You always get the good controller. The fact is, there will be balance. You're going to have local stuff. You're not going to end up putting everything up in the cloud and never have anything local. You're never not going to have machines to manage. It's just not going to happen. But there's going to be a balance. But the thing is that if you are completely convinced that everything that you've always done is going to be the things that you're doing 5 years from now, that's not going to be the case, I can assure you. So one of the big things with these top shops that I recognized was the fact that they were making investments in areas that I saw as foundational. Foundational because they were actually looking at it and saying, I need this investment to be maximized. I need this investment to actually be valuable 4 or 5 years from now. I don't need to fix a current problem. I need to fix something forever. So perspective, you look at it and you want to install Config Manager and enable features. And the fact is internally at Microsoft and hopefully in your environments, you're looking at things that, no, what you're technically doing is putting something in place that's going to enable you to do something. Putting a product in place and then not having it do really good stuff is like not having the product at all. You're not trying to check off a box. You're actually trying to excel in some way. You don't want to install Ops Manager 2012. You actually want to provide a monitoring solution. You want to make sure things stay up. And there are many different steps that you end up taking, whether it's with OpsMan, some other vendor, or some other add-in, or some other script, or some other tool, or putting an orchestrator in place that allows you to continue to have really good uptime. And that's what you need to be thinking about. And that's a lot of people shy away from that, and they say, well, that's not my area of expertise. Well, it needs to be. You need to at least know how to put these things together. And even if you need to farm out certain specialties, you have to know, I need you to make this particular thing happen so that my vision comes to fruition. So, what makes a top shop? And I look at the organizations that embrace inevitable change and invest the necessary resources to not dominate the new normal. And that's one of the things that I recognize, the cornerstone of when I was sitting in these companies and I saw something impressive, I was like, ooh, cool. And it wasn't the fact that they bought the latest technology. It wasn't because they ended up implementing something that hadn't been, that was just a brand new thing and they just spent a lot of money on something. It was the fact that there was a problem, an issue. They ended up investing the money to overcome that hurdle, and it made them better off in the long run. One of the big things that these that top shops need to have is properly defined goals. Now, properly defined goals, I used to be told that I had a really good knack for problem solving. And I was kind of like, well, I don't know how I do it. I really don't. I mean, I just kind of eventually get to the right solution. And I wasn't sure how I did it. And so I just kind of took it as I was good at problem solving. But after going through it a number of different times, I found I've got this painful drive to find the root cause of what is actually happening. And then the solution's usually easy. I mean, there's the problem, check the box or do whatever. Well, the fact was I didn't really troubleshoot the problem. I was sitting there and I wanted to know what the actual cause is. And when you're talking about defining, goals and things of that nature, it's a lot about asking the right questions. I don't need more disks in my machines at home. I'm almost out of space, but I don't need more disks. Technically, what I need is a cost-effective way to manage all the crap that I have that I'm not sure that I need, and to be able to store it so that I can access it at a later point in time. Now, whatever solution that I could have to actually make that happen, That's going to end up being my, what I would go for. But even I'm not even subscribing to cloud services because I just don't trust them with my stuff. But the fact is you're looking at that as the problem versus I need more disk space. That's an antiquated notion. On top of that, you end up having folks saying, okay, we need to find out a way to, optimize our WAN links. It's not necessarily the real problem. Technically, you've got a lot of traffic on the links you already have, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to enable the end user to do the work they need to do, and you need bandwidth so that you can do the work you need to do, and you want to find a way to make that happen for a cost-efficient way. Well, when you're doing that, you're no longer looking at just Blue Coat and Riverbed and branch cache and that stuff. You're actually saying, what can we do to better use bandwidth? And then you start looking at things like, maybe if we transition it instead of a centralized proxy, we can go out, directly to the internet, and we could turn on direct access. Options that weren't there before were all about the perspective that you took, defining what your problem is and what you're trying to achieve. Intelligent investment. I was talking with a customer 2 days ago at lunch, and I'm not sure if they're here or not, but I was talking to them about, what if things just work perfectly, and what if, what would you guys be doing? And they said, you know what? Our CEO was asking that. He said, why can't this stuff just work? Why can't it just do everything it needs to do and automatically take care of this stuff? And I said, okay. Well, when they said that, did you guys tell them, did you invest in direct access? Did you invest in data virtualization and application virtualization and doing this and doing that, the foundational components that would allow that to happen? And they said, no. He, pretty much shot down, and rejected the expense to do those projects. Well, at that point in time, if you're not making those intelligent foundational investments, you're falling behind. And I'll talk about some of these more in the examples that I'm going to get to. I mean, I'm not Tony Robbins, and I'm not talking about all this stuff in the ether. I'm going to be getting to examples. I'm just, again, trying to set that stage. Enabling administrators and end users. This is something that I am it's more about environment and atmosphere. And I'll get into one really good example that it was very much like a Google 20% time of where they wanted people to come up with solutions. And it came to the perspective that instead of the managers telling people and saying, I need you to go do this, or this is the project you're working on, what they did was they said, all right, team, here's the problem. We're thinking about this, but I'm open to ideas. By actually posing that problem and actually sharing what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish, at that point in time, they're asking every employee that was sitting at that table to think. And that, as I'll get into it, they sat there and they went, well, geez, how would I fix that? Not being saying, go evaluate WAN optimization tools. It was, think. And then those managers would listen. Enabling the end users, I'll get into it. Everybody and their mother knows about an app store. So if you are still trying to micromanage the exact applications, the exact condition, the exact settings on all these people and machines, that is so, well, it's today, but it's not going to be there tomorrow. That is so old way of thinking. And the fact is that your job should be to enable your end users to do the work that they need to do. Enable that end user. That end user doesn't care. They're not going to work to touch a Windows machine and click on icons. They're going to work to do whatever it is that they do and trying to please their boss and make their boss happy and get a raise. And the fact is if you actually get out of the way, that's better. And that was what Bill Buxton made he's a head researcher at Microsoft, and he's somebody that just impressed the heck out of me. He was just very, very good at articulating one particular point. And I'm bad at it, but I did 30 seconds here. It was that when you go to a store and you walk to that front door and you walk into that store, well, the door opened and it closed. Well, you don't go to a store with the purpose of opening the door, walking in, and closing it behind you. That's not why you went to the store. You went to the store to do something in the store. But technology was there that you didn't really think about, and it helped you without your knowledge. It was out of the way. You didn't even have to think about it. And that was one of the most poignant moments when I was listening to him speak, going, holy moly. As an early generation Connect. I mean, that was that's the whole concept of the Windows Phone. It's not the fact that you're opening up an app to do something. You didn't want to open up an app. You wanted to do something. Now, not an advertisement for Windows Phone. I'm just saying that you wanted to do something. And if you can make that something happen easier and more effective, then you're adding a net benefit. Daily use and design for daily use and reuse. And I've got a really good example in here of where that happened. But whenever you're creating something, whenever you're doing something, it's maximizing every click that you're doing. When you end up touching a piece of data, if you figure out that if everybody touches certain things in a certain way, when you go to your healthcare provider, and you're not the healthcare provider, you go to your doctor's office, and they sit there and you still live this address? Okay, and this is still your insurance? Yeah, okay. They actually check that information. It takes them a few seconds, but ultimately what they're doing is they're keeping everything fresh. And by doing that, they're actually putting in a process that's helping them in the long run. Their goal is not to record your information. Their goal when they're interacting with you is not to document that information. Their goal is to make sure that they have current information if it is necessary. And when you design for daily use and reuse, the things that you end up doing on a daily basis, all of a sudden you do it one time and you automate that one thing, or you at least do it in a way that's reusable. Every time you end up interacting with that from that point forward, you're getting a net benefit. And then this is another kind of a point I like to well, I'm not going to elaborate too much on it, but ultimately, too many people are looking at it as, I need to reduce cost, I need to reduce the expense. But when technically what you should be doing is trying to increase the value. Everything that you are doing, every person you're paying, everybody you're touching, every tool that you own, if you're not getting a tremendous amount of value out of it, then it's being wasted. And so instead of sitting there and trying to cut corners in new purchases or in these other areas, technically you should be trying to derive value from what you already have. And this last part, I don't know if anybody, I have no idea who Old Man Jenkins is. Apparently my kids on the bus told this to my kids, and they came home and they got these lessons learned. Don't be like Old Man Jenkins. And they, wagging their finger. I'm like, who's Old Man Jenkins? And they were pointing and saying he's up on the hill and stuff. So, I mean, I don't know. Until they have nightmares, it's a good thing. But the really good businesses have already recognized what I ended up seeing earlier on this week. And that was a perspective that people are coming out of school today and joining the workforce. And if you think back to when you joined the workforce, I know when I joined the workforce and I came in, I was looking at my machine, and I was fortunate enough to have a better machine than I had at work. So I was in at work going, oh my God, this is slow and dirty, and trying to put racing stripes on it, and it was terrible. But the fact was that I'm looking at these IT guys going, what are they doing? Man, if they were just using Windows 98, everything would be better. But I was thinking that about it. And I had a perspective when I came in there, and I had a mentality when I came in there, and it's changed over the years. But technically, I think about it right now, not only are mock hires coming out of college and new hires coming out of college and joining Microsoft, but technically there are people who've been there for 5 years. 5 years. They've got a good bit of work under their belt, and they have a different perspective than I do. They see things differently. They grew up differently. They know about things, or they knew about things when they joined the workforce, and they have a different perspective than I do. I think I'm a young guy. I'm not old. But it makes me feel old when I end up thinking about the fact that so many people, peers of mine, probably perceive things differently than I do. And I have to open up my mind and start thinking about things going, okay, what if I was somebody who always had Facebook? What if, I don't tweet because I don't have that much to say that I could put in 140 characters. I would have, tweet pages and stuff. I don't really do much on Facebook. But the fact is that there are people who live their lives on that and who'll probably be more productive in a social environment, even in the workplace. I have trouble grasping onto that. I'm looking at all this social stuff and going, ugh. It's not going to really provide value to me. It's just this thing that, people are jumping onto. But what ends up happening when somebody who is used to that, somebody who thrives on that, somebody who excels at that, and they're really, really smart, well, if you actually give them the tool that makes them excel, that's a net benefit. And I have to recognize that there are people who are actually going to take advantage of this stuff, even if it's not really my thing. And top shops consider that when they make decisions. They decide, well, it might not be a big thing, but just like us purchasing Yammer, it made no sense to me. But all of a sudden, you go through the cycle of thinking, you start using it a little bit more, you start getting into it, and you're like, well, geez, you know what? There is a benefit that it's adding. Top shops, these guys that I'm going to get into, the examples, trust me, I'm getting there, they're not perfect, but they're always improving. They're always looking for those next things that they can do. And at that point in time, that gives them a whole bunch of credit. When they end up not doing something right, but you end up seeing them working towards it, that's one of the more impressive parts. You've got to have talented resources. That's you guys. An environment of enablement. That's something you guys might not have. But it's something that you could actually do and try to, shove in there if you possibly could. Support from management, you might not have any control over it. And if there's any managers here in the room, you got to think about this, that you have to actually have management support to make certain things happen, because they're the ones who are signing the check, making approvals, coming up with directions. They're the ones who are actually going to allow those cool ideas that you have to actually happen. Open communication, that again is something that does not happen often enough. And that open communication is when somebody ends up saying, we have a problem, we need a solution, let's work on that, and I'm taking ideas. And that open communication back and forth between the decision makers and the team enables trust. And that trust is one of those times where if somebody is going to spend $300,000 on something stupid, and you help them to avoid that stupid expense, and they only have to pay $100,000 for something that does the exact same thing, there should be an understanding in your business that there's $200,000 that you saved, not that you should get a cut of it, but that money should be invested in something else that benefits the environment itself. And you get into the cyclic cycle where this money that you end up saving that starts getting reinvested into your business, and you actually start doing things better. And unfortunately, this is all too uncommon. When I was talking about this before and talking about this with a number of other customers, I couldn't stop thinking of Moneyball. Now, if you haven't seen the movie Moneyball, ultimately it's a true story about Billy Beane, manager of the Oakland A's, and they had, minuscule amount of money compared to other baseball teams. There's no parity in baseball, so basically you get the money, you get the money. If you're a small market, you're going to have less chance of winning the World Series than if you've got, lots of money. And in this, he ended up using a statistical model that they were called Moneyball, that would actually allow you to be more successful as a baseball team, because getting people onto base was more important than actually having really good stats. And so they followed that, and in this, they had a really good year. And this is from the John Henry, who was the owner of the Red Sox. In the movie, he quoted this. I don't know what he said in real life. But ultimately, he stated that anybody who is not following this new model that you've come up with, they're going to be a dinosaur. They're going to fall behind. That even if you think that it's silly or that's stupid, or even if people sit there and make fun of you, if you are pursuing something that you know is going to work, or you're pursuing something for the greater good, you're pursuing something foundational, instead of spending money on something shiny, you're implementing something that's actually going to help, direct access, or even fixing things that have been broken for years. That's the better investment of money. So we get to one of our first customer examples. I look at this as atmosphere of enablement. I know a lot of this is going to be about OS deployment. That's one of the big things that's happened over the past. Is there anybody here who still needs to migrate from XP to another version of Windows? Oh, come on, there's a slow hands coming up. Okay, it's not embarrassing. There's a lot of people doing that. The fact is that people are coming up with you're trying to figure out, we've got 1,500 applications. And so they set up, the team was sitting there talking about, okay, well, we got to get vendors to help us with this, and we've got all these things out there. And when they started looking at the prices and they were talking to people going, oh my God, this takes so long, and this is incredible, and it's a lot of money. And this guy sat there and said, you know, that's going to be a big expense. Maybe I can help. So he thought, what are we trying to do? I mean, we've got all these apps. Are they any good? You know, kind of. He was thinking about rationalization just because he was like, do we really need to send 1,500 of these packages through a pipe when, I don't know, I'm going to spin up 10 VMs that he sat, you know, in his little cube. And in that, he decided that he was going to whip up a script that simply advertised 10% of the packages, 5 every 3 hours, 3 times a day, and he would send those to these machines. Now, the reason why he did that was that, you know, you add that up, within a short period of time, you've actually advertised a lot of software to the machines. But what he was trying to do was figure out, what if I just sent it? I mean, they didn't have the wrappers. They were using MSIs with transforms. And he said, well, does it work? And so he would just send it. And what he would be looking for was he would say, you know, okay, well, this one, you know, with all 5 of these things, that worked perfectly fine. Checked some boxes and everything. And then he decided, you know, well, while I'm here, why don't I just see if it'll actually run? So he did, you know, his smoke test, you know, open, you know, file exit, just to see if it would work. And he wrote this stuff down. Checked it, you know, 3 times a day, just seeing if there were pop-up messages or whatever. But he was doing his other stuff. But once he set this up, he was simply looking at his aggregating information. And then he ended up qualifying it and putting into certain things of going, well, you know, that one I know that's got an issue because it's a, you know, an XP-specific whatever. This one actually failed because it popped up some message box. And this one, you know, first pass, it looks like it ran fine. Now, that's not user acceptance testing, but that was the fact that he actually just was getting information as a side gig. Took 2 days of him of setting that up to make that happen. And because he was actually touching these things and he was looking at it, he was like, oh, well, you know, that's an XP you know, update, and that's this other thing and whatever. And he was kind of weeding them out. And he had his own little spreadsheet and stuff, and he was kind of checking things off. And he had rationalized buckets at the end of those 2 weeks. And he had did the run launch testing. And this is an important part I'm going to get back to later. Because he decided to document the executable that the particular package would, you know, you would run, because he wrote that down, it provided him value later on. I'll get to that later. In doing so, when he ended up going through this process, he ended up weeding out a whole boatload of duplicate applications, older versions of things, and when they ended up deciding, we've got a policy that unless you can justify staying on an older version of Adobe Reader, we're not going to stay there. But those types of policies allowed him to start weeding off other things. They ended up having known issues, but they had 800 of them that at least on first blush seemed to work. Now, those are the ones that you can end up sticking people in front of and saying, test that, and make sure that it works. But the fact is that's 800 that you don't have to run through some vendor's app compat process. And then there were 300 that still needed to be addressed, but 300 is certainly a lot better than 1,500. Then there was another customer who there had a problem, which is, so what software do people use? And the thing was, it wasn't, they weren't sitting there thinking about, well, geez, okay, well, I need to purchase a particular solution or a product in order to find out what these people are using and all these other things. Their question was, I need to know what people are using. And regardless of what's being installed, and you know, they're talking about metering and all these other automated things, while they're talking about that, they decided, you know what, okay, let's just categorize these. Took them, you know, it was really simple. And then one of the guys ended up saying, look, I just signed up with this online survey, guys, and you get an Excel export. So he did a dump of each of the pieces of software, categorized them, and he sent them out to the people and said, do you use this? You know, never, frequently, infrequently, or whatever. I mean, regardless of what people have installed, this guy said, why don't we ask them what they need? And in the amount of time that many people take to do an RFP and decide what vendor they want to purchase a $10,000, $100,000 piece of software, these guys actually had the information in an Excel spreadsheet that they could export and manipulate the data. And then, when we're looking at designing for use and reuse, there was a a customer, they kept on churning and churning, and there were changes. And whenever they were trying to do an OS deployment, they kept on having either new pieces of software, new software updates, or they had to change to this, they had a configuration change. They had business units that weren't being responsive, and then were coming back with changes that they needed to make. So somebody was going back into MDT and making these changes. And ultimately, very early in the process, they sat there and said, look, I know between today and the time that our XP to Win 7 deployment is done, I know that there's going to be at least one more change. It could be a software update. I mean, Microsoft, we're getting great with software updates, but yes, you still get a couple a month. He knew there was going to be at least one more. And technically, if you think about it, we keep on encouraging people, come up with automated ways to keep your environment healthy. And so many people put that part later. They say, let me make it perfect first, and I'll get to keeping it healthy in phase 2. And what was decided, they said, wait a second. If enforcement is something that's important to us, and if we can enforce that all of our machines are going to look good at the end of all of this, why not use enforcement as the tool to ensure that the configuration is appropriate when the system's built? So he said, wait, let's just make this a business as usual activity. I'm going to, when I build my machine, I'm not going to touch the way that that machine is built. What I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to have my compliance settings actually make the changes to ensure that this machine is compliant. And all of those settings and all those other changes, they would put that change into the business as usual maintenance, proper golden image configuration setting, and not go back and revisit their deployment. And by doing so, they were then able to say, well, what's our business as usual activity for when we need to apply software updates and when we need to apply any of these other changes over time? Well, the fact is you're going to be doing that as a business as usual activity even after you're done doing your desktop deployments. So why not, exercise that engine? It's like somebody setting up this whole elaborate, disaster recovery plan and then never using it. Well, it's really, really great to have a great plan, but if nobody's ever done it, that's not really mitigating much risk. You need to exercise. You need to move these things. And what better way to do that than to actually do the activity that you need to do one time and forever? This was the part where I ended up losing people. And this is what caused me to have to do a little bit more of a prompting, because people were sitting there going, oh, come on. I loved this environment, and it was predicated on a fair amount of technology, but it wasn't anything that wasn't magical, but it just worked. And one of the first things that we talked about was the fact that investing in an XP to Win 7 or Win 8 migration is wasteful. Wasteful. Now, if any management's listening to this, I'm getting to a better point here. What you need to be looking at is your investment should be, I need a process to make all of this stuff happen from now until eternity that's flexible enough to introduce any changes I need, any new operating system, and any new packages. And it shouldn't matter that we're doing an XP. It shouldn't matter that we're going to Win 7 or going to Win 8 or going to Win whatever. It should just be, this is the process. And the investment in that process might cost you 10% more. But the fact that you're putting that process in place and not going to have to do it again is far more valuable. So I fell in love with these guys when they were doing this. And they've got the barcode on the outside of the box, and you scan the MAC address. They scan that MAC address, and that MAC address goes into a little widget tool that they ended up having. And that widget tool automatically published the necessary information into Config Manager. It populated MDT with information. It ended up giving the machine, it got a randomized name. It ended up, they then, after scanning it, it was put into another pile. Scanned it, put it into another pile. And then they had a bunch of minions who their job was removing cardboard, putting it on the network, hitting F12, getting the next one, putting it on the network, and they would build all their machines. And that was their day. They just kept on doing that of all these systems. And then they walked and they said, here you go. Here's your new machine. Give me your old one. Give me your old one. But they ended up doing that, and the fact was, the people then said, all right, thank you very much. And the most important thing in that whole process was the fact that the end user got trained on what they were getting. That was the focus. Make sure that when they get Windows 8, they know how to shut down their machine. Make sure they know how to find that little thing hidden in the corner. And they need to know that the start menu is somewhere different. That's what they had to focus on. They were not sitting there and going, okay, well, what do you guys, software you guys need? Okay, and we're going to worry about this. And it wasn't that. Their focus was something completely different. And they had to keep the other systems sitting around. But what this also enabled them to do was, instead of making this huge purchase of all new machines, what they did was they then set up a round robin. They would then, they had to keep the machines themselves in some cases, and they had to at least keep images of the machines in other cases for audit purposes. But what it ended up doing was, I then had a machine here in my hands, and wet wipe and clean it off, and they would sit there, and sometimes they would swap out some memory, or they would insert an SSD to kind of spiff it up. They even had time to sit there and make it look pretty for the next person who got it, so they wouldn't feel lame. Now, the thing was, is that, if you're not sitting there and thinking about the underlying technology that enables this to happen, if you're not sitting there and thinking about that, then you could sit there and go, okay, well, you didn't think about this, and what about that? And oh yeah, well, the thing was, is that I don't have all of the details right on here, because there'd be a tremendous amount of technical detail of exactly how they made that work. But the fact is that you can make that happen. And some of the fundamental technologies that were there, what did that user need? The user needs to have their applications, they need their data, and they need access to do what they need to do. That's what they need. They don't need to be worried about drivers and provisioning and all this other weirdness. They just need, give me my application so I can do my work, give me my internet access so I can look at kitties on the internet, and I need my data so I could see all the pictures that I saved of kitties from the internet. And the fact is that using the config manager application model, that's one of the pieces that enables it. Why? Because you end up advertising to a user versus a machine. Now, I've always protested, I've always protested the fact that you don't install software on a user. Install software on a machine. So you should send the software to the machine. And I was wrong. Well, I'm wrong now that 2012 is out. And the reason why I was wrong is the fact that my goal wasn't to install software. My goal should have been to give software to the end user so they could do their job. Enable them to do their job. And however I needed to do that, in whatever format I needed to do that, that was the most important thing. And I needed to be able to consider that and say, well, geez, well, if it's not me sitting there and installing it, well, then at that point in time, I can give data to, I can advertise something to the end user. And then on top of that, you end up using all of the new models and things, Active Directory policy, and you can handle your printer mappings and drive mappings, and direct access. Direct access, you're not dealing with VPN and certain other scenarios. You are able to provision certificates when you need to. All these other really neat things, because remember, you had your hands on it in a lab environment before you gave it to the person. So all those really hard things that you're trying to do while you're 1,000 miles away, there's a lot of other things that you can do. At least in this customer scenario, their model allowed them to make all of that happen. And then data virtualization, whether you're using folder redirection or some network drive. One of the biggest arguments that I get in, I don't get into arguments with them. I have disagreements where I respectfully don't support the position that they're taking. And in that was, well, you know what? Our end users, their data might be in various places scattered all over the drive. If there's mystery data scattered all over the drive in an unpredictable location, I really can't imagine that it's that important. And the thing is if it is that important, somebody should have thought about saving that or backing it up, because when that hard drive crashes, they're not going to have it then either. So the fact is that if you are concerned about all these little things in all these other locations, well, the fact is you don't have the policy that says, put your data here if you want it to be saved, anything else is going to disappear, and not be protected and not be covered. This is how you're going to put your data in an enterprise workspace so that it doesn't disappear, so that we can save that stuff. And if it's really important to you, then that's where you're going to put it. And people are going to make mistakes, but the fact is that that mistake would also cost them if their hard drive just happened to crash. And so data virtualization is one of those things that, holy moly, if you actually think about it, if you did Config Manager with AppV and data virtualization before doing your system migrations, let's see, you're not doing USMT in the middle of that migration. How many tens of minutes or more are you not wasting in build time because icons appear on their desktop whenever they log in? I mean, there's time savings in that. There's genuine benefits. And the fact is that if you're ever going to go to any kind of data virtualization, if you're ever going to go to that, well, why not do it now before you have to go about one of these big migrations from OS to OS? Because all of a sudden, you've now eliminated one of the big catch points that people run into with USMT. And then also, that's with doing the infrastructure. Well, I have a whole different plan of doing an infrastructure if somebody needs to have state migration points in 500 different strategic locations all around their enterprise so they can save user data out on the network than I do if they say, yeah, don't worry about the user data, it's covered. Whoa. That changes the timeline that it's going to take me to do deployment. It's going to change the timeline of how long it's going to take to build the machines. It opens up a whole bunch of options for you. Trying to figure out how much time I have left. Yes, so in this example, I mean, this was a long-term plan where they're making an investment where they knew that they needed to spend the money on the things that were going to benefit them in the long term. And that initial sacrifice, I looked at it and I gave an example of this before. It's compound interest. I don't know every single benefit that data virtualization is going to provide you. That data virtualization is going to provide you. I don't know every single area where you're going to benefit from it. But I know it's going to benefit you at least once, and probably twice, if not a tremendous amount more. There's going to be times when, oh, well, geez, we didn't have to buy that backup product that's going to copy things out here. We didn't lose money when these people lost their hard drive or this project, or we had to go through, whatever in a clinical trial. But it's that compound interest. It's the fact that if you make the investments that are not only applicable today, but are going to apply to that mystery world that I mentioned before, that's going to be a tremendous amount of value. I already talked about this. One of the things that I wanted to get into here was the fact that when you are coming up with these policies and coming up with these processes, one of the best things that you can do is say, guys, when we create a script, or when we create something from this point forward, we're going to do it in this way. When you touch this file, or you touch this other thing, can you guys verify that there aren't any commas or quotation marks in the name of the folder or whatever? Or you got to make sure that everything that you're putting, you do it in this way so that we can reuse this data in an intelligent format. And one of the things that somebody who maybe has had some SQL experience or somebody who's been a developer in the past, you start to think about it. If I'm recording something, I want to know what my key value is, my key data. What is something that I could actually export or import or key on that would allow me to bind two pieces of information together? And that was in this example. If you remember back to the guy who was doing the 1,500 applications, he wrote down the name of the executable that he actually that was associated with the actual package. He just happened to write that down. We ended up having the name of a package. He did a dump of the table that was inside of a config manager, 30 seconds or whatever. He dumps the package table. He's got the package ID. He ends up having the name of the package, whatever they assign to that. On top of that, he then said, well, wait a second. You know what? I could simply say, well, what's my Win 7 or Win 8 version of this particular application, the one that we've tested? So he then put a column in there and said, okay, well, this is what that is going to get replaced with. But I still might need that old package ID. He added the primary executable of that particular piece of software. And then he created this filter, and I won't get into details of it, but it was used in the next steps. But ultimately, what he decided to do was he wasn't going to start deleting things that were XP related. He came up with a way of, if he happened to have to recreate his report, he wouldn't have to go back and start deleting lines again. So he ended up creating particular conditions where these are the things that I know relate to a Windows XP. And so he was able to filter out some of that stuff in his future efforts. And then for each workstation, what he said was, all right, you know what? I know recently used executables on these machines. Even if you don't do software metering, people go, well, geez, I'm going to create like 1,000 metering rules. Well, even if you don't do that, with Asset Intelligence, it actually records the PID of every executable that you open, whether you care to or not, and then it compares them to your metering rules and goes, nah, it's no match. That doesn't mean that it wasn't recorded in one of our log files that says, yeah, that PID was created for that executable. So you know that it was opened recently and used recently. So what he decided to do was, okay, for each machine, tell me all of the executables that have been used on that recently. And then he ended up reducing it by duplicates and everything, and he decided, wow, you know what? I can marry this up with my report with the actual names of the application. Key value. So he then ran that report, and then he took that report and said, well, wait a second. I know the machine, and I also know the person who owns that machine. And because they branded that machine with the fact of not just the owner, but the fact it was done in such a way that they had the user ID. At that point in time, he automated the process, and he emailed that user and said, this is the software you've recently used. We're planning to take you to the next version of Windows. Do you have any other stuff that you'd want on there, or is this good? And he had that folder, that profile of the machine kind of just stuck off in a pending folder. And if the person said, yeah, it's good to go, well, at that point in time, he would then move it into, you know, an in progress or whatever he named that. But then he ended up having somebody who, you know, if they said, no, I also need this piece of software, well, he just put that in place. And at that point in time, he then had not just what the person had used, but also what the person wanted. And he didn't have to sit there and do this whole big, robust, whatever tooling or anything like that. He just happened while he was messing around and while he was doing other stuff in an environment of enablement, he ended up recording the data. And because he did it in a consistent fashion where he knew maybe he'd want to key on some of these items going forward, he was able to reuse that data and reuse that data. And if somebody else needed that later on, they could have used that as well. And then when he ended up needing to create the profile so that when they build a machine specifically for a person, they were able to then say, for that person, we're giving them this machine, and for that machine, here's the software that that person getting the machine requested, put the profile into MDT, and therefore they automatically build it with the software that they needed during the task sequence. And this next item, frictionless computing. What time does this end? I got 5 minutes? Okay. All right, you can ask me questions afterwards. I want to see if I can get through some of these other ones. Just really quick. Ultimately, I like to promote frictionless computing. It's the whole environment of where you end up using AppV, you deploy software to the end user, and then they are able to go from machine to machine to machine, and they've got the applications that they need. If you're considering the fact that your job is not to install software, but your job is to give the person the software they need when they need it, that's the advantage of that new application model. There are some examples that some customers did. One of them ends up being that was discussed by Brad, where they had a VDI session in the Windows IT environments, and the fact that you can now secure your data based upon your location. That you can not just say that Bob can see it, but Bob can see it on a machine that I trust and not on one that I do not. And by doing that kind of location-specific access, it opens up a whole other world of elements. We've got folks, Windows 8, when you end up having Hyper-V, it enables some other guys. They were setting up their super admin in a VM that was running on each of the admin's machines. And because Hyper-V in Win 8 allows you to bind to a wireless network adapter, which Hyper-V within Windows Server didn't used to, that was enabled for them. And we'll just get past that one. End user enablement. I went through that one. Ultimately, I'm going to leave you now with the fact of, first off, standardizing with PowerShell. This is a huge thing. When I'm talking about automating tasks, we had a gentleman named Josh Sanderlin. He put together, through complete PowerShell scripting, it was the ability that he had a customer who needed to do hundreds of distribution points. And he was trying to figure out, well, gee, how do I make this happen where I don't have to do a whole bunch of work? Now, Bill Gates ended up saying that he wants to give work to the laziest person because they'll find it the simplest way to do it. He wasn't lazy. He was very creative. We ended up creating this where you could send media to any number of the offices, and they had the admin who popped it into the machine, hit F12. It ended up building the operating system, provisioning all of the applications that it needed, then registered itself as a distribution point within Configuration Manager and had all of the data preloaded on the distribution point, re-registered that content so that it didn't have to be copied across the WAN. And that DP was available because it knew where it was located when it was built. It was also be able to put itself into the right DP boundaries. Orchestrator, you want to be using Orchestrator as your as a workhorse. You know, any of those things that you used to put for used to hand off to any subordinates or anything like that. Anything that takes a couple minutes to do, if you do it repeatedly, you're going to end up saving time if you automate that. COIT, bring your own device. I won't even get into this. The fact is that if you guys end up getting a CTO, I know a lot of your environments, you don't have the people, you don't have upper management buying into it. A lot of you are sitting there going, that's not going to work for us. Well, the fact is, much of this change happens when somebody comes in and says, you know what? That's it. We're done with all this old way of doing something. Give me your ideas. Tell me what I'm going to do. Tell me what we're going to do to make this stuff happen. And you guys should be able to answer those questions and say, if we did this, we would be more successful. And lastly, anybody who's not building a team right now and rebuilding, following these principles with clouds, with cloud access, with actually focusing on what things will look like in this mysterious next 4 to 5 years, they're going to be dinosaurs. And they're going to be watching the folks who did take advantage of that win business. So I'm going to leave you with that. Ran out of time, but thank you very much. Questions? Okay, so questions? I actually do have a little bit more time. Folks are saying that I got a little bit early, so I actually can get into more stuff. So for those of you who want to be a little bit more technical, one of the scripts that I actually provide within here, and if you end up sending me an email, I can provide it to you. It's something that ends up still happening with folks with Config Manager 2007. It's the fact of you end up trying to do a deployment of your agents. And you try to do that deployment, and you end up getting these CCR retry errors, and that content's put into there. So we end up having the ability to I've got the Excel spreadsheet that actually parses through that directory using the particular script that's shown here on the screen. And the Excel spreadsheet, when you open it up, it'll then display the counts of the machines with the error messages and corresponding way to fix those. I'm going to skip past that. The fact that you now have PowerShell within Config Manager SP1, the fact is that every action that you have from within the Config Manager console, everything that you do within that console, it's being done by that Config Manager console connecting to a WMI provider, and that WMI provider performing a particular action. And in the past, you would actually have to start learning those methods and figuring those things out. But now we actually have Config Manager, we've got PowerShell integrated with it. So those actions that you used to have to code and figure out WMI, if you've learned PowerShell, you're in the position where you can do everything that you needed to do within the console. You can do it independently. You can write your own console. You can create anything that you want. If you say that that console's terrible, I can't believe Microsoft did that. You know, what I want a way to check every single package and make sure that it has consistent settings. No, we don't have that in our console. But you know what? Whip together a little script that actually goes through each of the items in the SQL database and say, okay, what are all the settings and are they consistent or not? Talk about WMIC. A number of these examples in here, I know I talked about the fact that you should be using PowerShell. You should really, doing VB scripts or anything, because PowerShell is the foundation of our System Center products, because it's what we're doing with Orchestrator, and I was promoting Orchestrator and saying that Orchestrator needs to be that workhorse of your environment, I didn't rewrite these. Now, one of the things that I skipped over when I thought I was out of time, one of the things I skipped over was the fact that what would happen in the community if somebody out there decided to write a PowerShell script and an Orchestrator runbook that actually fixed a substantial problem, or maybe, let's say, one of the things I have in here is customers still have issues with DNS. That, even if you got scavenging turned on, it might not be consistent. And I end up being in environments where if I don't end up checking that beforehand, I end up getting I have less pleasant experience later on in the project because I find out about it and have to fix it then. Well, the fact is that it does a script that's contained in here is where it ends up going out and pinging a machine, and then it does a reverse lookup on that IP address and says, did I get the same machine back? And if it doesn't, then it lets me know. And then I can tell these people that they have, 20% of their machines, if they're in the wrong place, wrong location, they're going to get redirected or not be able to access the right resources. What if somebody in this room, or somebody listening to this in future years, what if somebody actually came up with that PowerShell script to do the same thing, and then somebody puts that into an Orchestrator runbook that not only does that, but cleans up the mess? And you end up bringing this runbook because you're running Orchestrator, and you say, oh, this is my DNS cleanup runbook. Something that a tremendous number of customers are experiencing could be addressed, fixed, no longer there, just because of that kind of contribution. On top of that, one of the things that I'm just dying for, what if viruses and malware were so cost ineffective to create that people just stop doing them? Now, some people say, oh, that's silly, it's not going to happen. Well, think about this. Let's pretend that it could happen. What would happen if all of these antivirus and malware services worked together and collaborated, and when they knew about something and they found something and they found a vulnerability, the environment, Windows, iOS devices, Apple, Android, all these things, all of a sudden, they were made aware of them and updated and protected themselves within such a short period of time that the amount of effort that it took to find those gaps and to exploit those gaps and to get everything out there, by the time they actually got that out there and it was recognized, they didn't have anybody else to infect, and the ones who got infected got cleaned up. That's the type of thing that we're looking at right now, is the fact that you're not only looking to create things, we talk about use and reuse, but as a community member, as somebody who values the community, I am looking for folks from this community to create that type of solution. And I'm also counting on you not just to do it in-house, but the fact is that if we end up making things better, and I know I'm not trying to ask you to do Microsoft's jobs for you, but the fact is that Microsoft can only do so much. If you guys are able to create these types of things and share them in a consistent fashion, all of a sudden we can all stop talking about, okay, well, this error code, I had this problem, oh, and you've got to run this script and tweak this and do. We can stop doing that and talking about, you know what I did. It's the coolest thing ever. Fire in the, the discussion changes. So I do have a few minutes. I'm going to take questions. If anybody wants to ask about any of this, there's other things that are in this, but a number of you have already seen them. Happy to take questions. Now, if nobody asks any questions, then I'm actually going to have to go through the slides. Okay, raise your hands. How many people would like me to continue through the slides? Okay, all right, we'll do that then. All right, so here's the one of the things that I had. I actually, when I talked about creating something to use and reuse, this is one of the things that I put together, and it was a run.vbs. It originally was called Godzilla, but I didn't want to deal with trademarks or whatever other stuff. But it was run.vbs, and what it was the shell of the tool that allowed me to fix a lot of stuff on a lot of machines. And that's all that all I had to do was plug into it what I wanted to do, and then it would be able to do that on a number of different machines. So for example, I ran into a scenario with a customer who had a number of machines who they simply weren't getting the client installed, and it was getting a 1603 error. And so I decided, you know what, I'm just going to drop down MSI exec onto that machine and kick it off with a PS exec. And that's what the run thing does. So I set that up to make that happen. I put it into, I've got a, the run.vbs, and then I've got whatever it is, fix WMI or run the Windows installer. I also had it as far as kicking off the client. They were not fixing their DNS issues. And so my ability to get the agent onto these machines was hindered because they still had fundamental infrastructure issues. And at my level right now, I was sitting there and going, you know what? I would have a discussion with them about fixing that fundamental issue before we started really just trying to, jackhammer this other thing in there. But at that time, I said, you know what? I'm just going to have to figure out a way to get it down on there. So I was able to set it up to actually copy the config manager setup files locally and then kick it off with the proper command line. And then another thing was fixing auto update. You have it with Windows XP. It's not exactly relevant today, but we actually have many people who are going to be keeping XP around for another couple of years. Well, in that, you actually need to have Windows Update working. And the next slide, I actually have a shotgun script that resolves just about every Windows Update issue and kind of starts it fresh for you. And then fixing WMI. It's not supported. It's something that I shouldn't even be saying, but the fact is it does happen on old machines, and WMI needs to be fixed. And in that, it's you whack the repository and let it rebuild itself. And if you need questions about why it's not supported, I've got a whole litany of them. But it actually is the one way of fixing it. You're not going to troubleshoot why this 10-year-old machine, its WMI is no longer working. The fact is that you also have to go back and make sure that you look at it and say, well, it's not working, and it stopped working after I fixed it. Well, if it stops working shortly after you fix it, then you've got another issue, root cause. Find out why that other thing is breaking it. This is the software update fix. I mean, ultimately, it's just re-registering the appropriate DLLs. It's getting rid of that backup directory, and then setting the ACLs on one of the services or two of the services and stops and starts it. And regardless of any of the issues that you have with Windows updates, just about everyone is going to get fixed with that. Here's where I was doing a reverse lookup, and I've got the commands here, where it ends up simply doing it pings the machine, and I end up doing it with a WMI ping status. And then it ends up doing an actual lookup on that IP address. So here's the script that I use, and then it ends up dumping it out to a log file, and you can then take that log file and you can give that to other people and say, these are all the machines that we have issues with. I ended up developing this at a particular customer who was telling me that we've got 5,000 machines, 5,000 of them that config manager, well, it was SMS at the time. This terrible product, SMS, it won't install its client, and it kept on trying to install the client, kept on trying to install the client, kept on trying to install, it didn't work. So they were getting rid of it. But until they get rid of it, they wanted to see if, okay, fine, you got some extra hours, throw them at this. And I looked at it, and I went to try to find these machines, and ultimately, I ended up mapping to them, or I was getting to them in the console, but it ended up that I wasn't on that machine. I was on a different one. I saw I was redirected, so I figured out, well, I'm going to try to figure out how many this is. So I took all of those machines, and it just being, there were ones that were 4, 5, 10-year-old, okay, not 10-year-old, I think the oldest was 6-year-old record of saying that this was a machine, and yet it was sitting out there, and somebody from a particular area, if they were trying to find that machine and it was also the fact that when you are trying to put machines into Config Manager, the first thing it ends up doing when it does a discover from Active Directory is it says, does this machine exist in DNS? Is it a frequent, has it been on the network in any time in the recent past to have a record in DNS? And if it does, then yes, it'll appear back in Config Manager. So even when they deleted out of Config Manager, they would come back because they didn't clean up Active Directory either because they thought they were active machines. Truth be told, they had 5,000 fewer machines in their environment than they thought. And they then said, well, geez, that's going to impact our licensing counts too. So, it was, net benefit, and at that point in time, there was a little understanding that it might not have been the product that was the issue. Okay, I'm really going to end this time. It's 3 minutes left. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask me afterwards. Really, it's the end this time.